was almost, it looked like it was, I don't know what it was. It was a flying saucer or what it was. It wasn't an airplane. It was not an airplane. It was down off the low.
You're listening to Pursuit of the Paranormal podcast with your hosts, Ash Ellis.
Not this week.
And Greg Tomlinson.
Hey, it's just Greg tonight on this episode because Ash has decided to go and sun himself in foreign climates. So this is a slightly different version of Pursuit of the Paranormal podcast, where it's just me and I'm talking about all things surrounding my favourite subject, which are poltergeists. So if this is your thing, strap in, take a chair, get a drink, and have a listen. Let me know what you think. Cheers. And we'll now be looking at one of the most disturbing and chaotic forces in the paranormal, poltergeists. Unlike a typical haunting, where spirits linger silently in the shadows, poltergeists are active, unpredictable, and sometimes even violent. They slam doors, throw objects, and even speak. What are they? Are they mysterious and mischievous spirits? Are they demons? Or could they be something a little bit more unsettling? A manifestation of our own minds? It's something that I've been interested in since I was a young lad. And I grew up watching Arthur C. Clarke's World of Strange Mysteries. And there was one particular episode whereby they talked about poltergeists and the Enfield poltergeist, which has always been one of my most favourite cases. It's probably one of the most studied, talked about poltergeist cases after Amityville. Whether or not that was a haunting, I don't know. But the poltergeist enigma really stuck with me. Not only did it petrify me when I was little, I won't shy away from that. It was the fact that something in your house, a normal house that you live in, can terrorize, for want of a better phrase, a whole family. It can tear a family apart. Although you don't hear about so many cases nowadays, around the 70s and 80s, there definitely was. When people were sort of into paranormal films, you had Poltergeist film, which was frightening back then. Most definitely probably doesn't stand up so well now. You had The Exorcist had come out in the 70s, so there was a renewed sort of horror angle that the general public were watching films about, and there was definitely an interest in that. And like I say, I used to watch Arthur C. Clarke, and he also used to do lots of weird shit, talk about loads of weird shit. That's a program that if you've not seen it, definitely I recommend. And then you have programs like Ghost Watch that BBC did in 1992, which was like an early mockumentary, but gained a phenomenal amount of complaints. People ringing in, complaining to the BBC about it. It was one of the most frightening things I think I've ever seen on TV. And then you get through to like more modern day stuff, where the guys that used to do League of Gentlemen and Inside Number 9, they did a live, in air quotes, paranormal episode for Halloween a couple of years ago. So it's something that's always piqued everybody's interest. I think right from the Victorian times and when seances were around and whatnot, it was definitely a subject whereby spirits and entities would manifest themselves in different ways, and I think it's really interesting subject, mainly because it's frightening. You've got UFOs, UAPs, whatever you want to call them, and they're kind of like a solid object that people see. Poltergeists are stuff and occurrences and things that people don't see, and I think that's more scary because it invades you. It invades your personal space. So yeah, it's a really interesting subject that I'm going to cover today. I'm absolutely fascinated by it and have done for like 40 years. I'm currently writing a book about poltergeists, which will hopefully be out in 2025, depending on when you're listening to this. So poltergeists are one of the most famous and unsettling types of paranormal phenomena, often associated with physical disturbances. So objects moving, being thrown, unexplained noises, and even physical interactions like touching and pushing. So the term poltergeist comes from German words poltern, to make noise, and Geist, spirit or ghost. So basically a noisy spirit or a noisy ghost. But unlike other ghostly entities which are usually tied to a place or a person, poltergeists are believed to be more chaotic, disruptive and malevolent in their interactions. So, poltergeist activity. Physical disturbances, so objects move by themselves, doors slamming, furniture being rearranged, or items being thrown. And we'll come on to some of the cases and in a bit more detail. Unexplained noises, so banging sounds, knocking, or strange voices, often loud and disruptive. I was listening and watching a program about poltergeists. I can't even remember where or when it was, some years ago. And they talked about the fact that they'd recorded the rapping sound of a poltergeist inside a wall in a house. And when they played it back, they were astonished to find that normally the sound wave peaks. It goes up, rises rapidly when the bang happens. But with a poltergeist, bang or knock, it's almost like an inverted. So it's sort of like it's like a reverse knock. It's very difficult for me to explain it orderly. But yeah, it was like the noise was actually made differently. The sound was different. Poltergeist activity is also thought to be related to a release of emotional energy, often centered around a person, typically an adolescent going through emotional turmoil, or prepubescent girls. This has led to speculation that poltergeist could be a form of psychokinesis or mind over matter rather than traditional haunting. I'll come on to that a little bit later. Poltergeist phenomena tends to be temporary, lasting anything from days and weeks up to sort of months and a couple of years, and then just generally just dies off. And this kind of fits in with the turmoil and the pubescent adolescence, because that's sort of a time period where your body and you just go through changes. There are also some accounts that report poltergeist activity causing harm, such as scratches or even pushing people, making them distinct from other ghostly encounters. The Enfield poltergeist is a particular case where Janet, the daughter of the family, was actually seen levitating in her bedroom. And the Enfield case took place in the 70s in Enfield in North London, and it all started with some knocking noises, then some furniture was moving, witnessed by police officers, loud noises, and like I mentioned, Janet was seen levitating at one point from somebody on the road looking up into her bedroom. Investigators and paranormal researchers, including members of the SPR, of which I'm a member myself, the Society for Psychical Research. Maurice Grosse was involved, but scepticism remains about whether the case was a hoax. We'll come on to that a little bit later, and I'll put my thoughts on that. Then you've got the Bell Witch. The Bell Witch was between 1817 and 1821, so a little bit longer than some of the others. But this case was from Tennessee, involved a family plagued by strange noises, voices, physical attacks. The Bell Witch is considered one of the earliest and most documented examples of poltergeist activity in the US. And I believe that the Bell Witch was part of the inspiration of the Blair Witch. For anybody who's seen the Blair Witch Project, if you haven't, check it out. That ending, oh my god, that ending. Anyway, the Rosenheim poltergeist in 1967. In this case, a lawyer's office in Rosenheim, Germany, experienced strange phone calls, flickering lights, office items being thrown around. Even electricians and police witnessed the events, though some skeptics attribute it to faulty equipment or hoaxes. So there are some theories behind poltergeists. Psychokinesis, or RSPK. Some researchers propose that poltergeist activity is a result of unconscious psychokinesis, where a person, usually in emotional distress, unknowingly causes objects to move or creates disturbances. This is why we've got the prepubescent or adolescent kids, typically girls, going through immense change in their life and causing a lot of emotional stress on their body and their mind. Another theory relates to spirit entity. So traditional ghost theories suggest poltergeists are mischievous or malevolent spirits. Environmental factors. So skeptics often point to environmental explanations, such as electrical issues, seismic activity, or even mental illness, to explain the occurrences without invoking the supernatural. I also watched a documentary whereby they took elevated magnetic readings from a property that was known to have had poltergeist activity. So maybe that weird feeling you have when you think somebody's standing next to you, etc., and the feeling that somebody's close, is actually just changes in the electromagnetic field around you, which is quite possible. Poltergeists, though, do continue to fascinate and terrify people. Countless films, countless TV programs, documentaries. You only have to watch YouTube and type in the word poltergeist and you get umpteen thousands of videos around poltergeists. If you watch the Blackwell Ghost, the series of films there really does take an amazing look at poltergeist activity and hauntings in general. So if you haven't checked out the Blackwell Ghost, definitely do. Big shout out to Turner Clay for creating some of the best paranormal films I've seen in a long time. They definitely are Moorish in terms of content, so check those out. They're very good. What we need to look at now is sort of around the origins of a poltergeist. Poltergeist activity isn't just a modern fascination. Its deep roots in folklore and history. Accounts of noisy and restless spirits date back to ancient cultures. In medieval Europe, poltergeists were feared as manifestations of witches or demons. The activity was seen as a curse or a punishment from an unknown force. And obviously back then, people were more spiritual, so you can understand that. During the Middle Ages, though, poltergeists were linked to witchcraft, and disturbances were considered malevolent acts of witches attempting to control or curse a household. This belief sometimes escalated into witch trials. So you only need to look at Salem witch trials. You've got the Pendle Hill witches, where the accused were tortured or executed, accused of invoking the poltergeist. In more modern settings, such as Victorian England, poltergeist activity often intertwined with seances and spirit communications. 19th century saw a rise in spiritualism, and many believed poltergeist to be the work of troubled souls who needed to communicate, but whose messages were lost in violent and chaotic expressions. To psychological theories, poltergeist activity in the human mind. One of the most compelling modern theories surrounding poltergeist activity involves, like I mentioned a minute ago, RSPK, which is recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. This theory suggests that a person, often referred to as an agent, air quotes, could subconsciously cause physical disturbances through psychokinetic energy, particularly in states of intense emotional distress. In many documented cases, this agent is frequently an adolescent, often a teenage girl undergoing puberty or emotional turmoil. You only have to look at some of the cases that see this, and I've spoken to many people, I've watched many documentaries, and they all seem, not all of them, so I won't say, oh, you've got the South Shields poltergeist, which wasn't, but surrounds this age of person, particularly a female person. And the Enfield poltergeist from 1977, like I mentioned before, had Janet Hodgson was the 11-year-old daughter at the centre of what appeared to be a manifestation, and a girl dealing with her parents' recent separation. Furniture moved, objects flew across the room. Deep, disturbing voice was said to speak through Janet. What makes this even eerier is that investigators captured audio recordings of the voice, an unnatural, guttural tone allegedly coming from the voice. Now, I will play this clip for you now.
I'm invisible.
You're invisible? Why are you invisible?
So much H-O-S-T.
This correlation between adolescence and poltergeist activity, though, has fascinated psychologists and paranormal investigators alike, suggesting that there may be an intense unconscious release of energy during periods of extreme emotional distress and strain. Dr. William G. Roll, a well-known parapsychologist, researched extensively into poltergeists and concluded that these agents might be projecting internal conflicts outward in the form of psychokinetic energy. To many paranormal investigators, poltergeists represent the most dangerous and unpredictable class of spirits. Unlike a residual haunting, where spirits replace scenes from their lives, poltergeists seem to have an awareness and an intent. They're often described as mischievous, sometimes malevolent, and seem to delight in creating fear. In some extreme cases, poltergeist activity is associated with demonic forces. In cases like the Bell Witch haunting, the poltergeist or entity claimed to be an evil witch that terrorised the Bell family, eventually leading to the death of John Bell. The activity was so profound and violent that it drew the attention of then future US President Andrew Jackson, who famously said he would rather face the British Army again than confront the Bell Witch. Some stories claim that the poltergeist was not just a wandering spirit, but a demon that had attached itself to the family. Skeptics often argue that poltergeist cases are nothing more than a result of trickery or exaggeration. For example, the Rosenheim poltergeist case, which we'll cover off, saw disturbances in a law office in Germany, where telephones rang off the hook, lights flickered violently, and office furniture moved. Despite having experts from several fields investigate, including physicists, no explanation was found, though skeptics suggest it could have been a result of a cleverly rigged devices. Similarly with the Enfield poltergeist, while there were over 30 witnesses, including neighbours, journalists, investigators, and, as I mentioned, the police, some skeptics argue that the activity was faked by the Hodgson children. However, recordings, photographs, and even video evidence of strange phenomena, including furniture moving without human intervention, make it difficult to dismiss the case entirely. Although Janet was caught on tape playing a trick, so who knows. So, modern day ghost hunters use sophisticated tools like infrared cameras, full spectrum cameras, electromagnetic field detectors or EMFs, and audio recorders to capture device and evidence of poltergeist activity. EMF spikes, sudden temperature drops, and unexplained electronic malfunctions are often reported during such investigations. In rare cases, investigators claim to have captured poltergeist phenomena on camera, including objects moving without cause or strange shadows. One controversial experiment involved using infrasound, which is extremely low frequency sound to stimulate poltergeist activity. It's believed that infrasound can cause unsettling feelings, hallucinations, and even the sensation of objects moving when they're not. This has led to debates over whether poltergeist phenomena are external forces or simply the brain's reaction to environmental factors. Poltergeist activity has been immortalised in horror cinema and literature. The 1982 film Poltergeist, which is terrifying, was produced by Steven Spielberg. It played on classic themes of a haunted home being terrorised by poltergeist forces. The film's tagline, "They're here," has become synonymous with the unsettling feeling of malevolent spirits entering our world. That was an absolutely awful impression of the little girl, Carrie Ann, I think her name is, or was in the film, who was sort of like the main focus of the spirits. And whilst not pre-pubescent, she was like a young girl at the time. It showed that it's centered around young people. The Poltergeist curse. Interestingly, a legend surrounds the Poltergeist movies series itself, with claims that a curse plagued the actors and crew. Several cast members, including young actress Heather O'Rourke, who played Carol Ann, that I mentioned, died tragically after the film's release, fueling rumours that the films had inadvertently invited a real poltergeist to torment the cast. Weirdly, if you look at the end of, I think it's the end of the Poltergeist film, the house sort of sinks, there's skeletons coming up from the ground in the water that the family are sort of submerged in. And my understanding is that the film budget, it was so expensive to get like prosthetic skeletons that they actually used real skeletons, and some of those were from Indian Native American burial grounds, in some way cursed the film's making. So yeah, it's proper weird. There's lots of strange things that happen with that film. In H.P. Lovecraft's works, poltergeist-like entities often embody the fear of the unknown, invoking madness and chaos. They are forces beyond human comprehension, dangerous because of their unpredictability and their disdain for natural laws. So I'm just going to have a quick look at a few of the cases that we've mentioned off. There are a lot more. There's the Battersea poltergeist, which is fascinating. Surrounds a girl again. You've got the Enfield haunting. You've got the Amityville haunting. You've also got the events that inspired the Conjuring films. It's just all sorts of famous poltergeist cases. You've got the Bothell Hell House. I've spoken to the guy that was subjected to this unknown force writing stuff on the walls, burning Bibles in his house. Phenomenal amount of stuff happened to him when he moved into a property, and it was a new property. It wasn't even an old property. So you don't have to have poltergeist activity in old properties, the typical properties that you would expect, like mansions and old places. It can be brand new houses. This can be normal houses, which to me suggests that it does centre around a person rather than the property. You've got the stone tape theory, you've got residual hauntings, where they tend to be the place rather than the person. Poltergeist activity is the person, for definite. So, the Enfield poltergeist, it's late 70s, it's North London. For 18 months, a quiet London suburb became the battleground. I say battleground because it's a lot of shit went down. And it's one of the strangest poltergeist activities ever recorded. It's probably one of the most documented poltergeist cases ever. There's plays about it. There have been numerous documentaries about it. There's a really good one on YouTube I think it's from the BBC, that did like an episode, like a Panorama episode on it. So I suggest you watch that. It's where the clip of the voice that I played earlier come from. It inspired the Conjuring 2 film that was inspired by events in the Enfield poltergeist in Bill Wilkins. And if you listen to the Brohio podcast, it's even got as far as that, where the password to get into their secret Facebook group is Bill Wilkins, and that's the name of the guy who, in their terms, 70 years old, and he died in this chair in his own shit. But on a serious note, it goes across all cultures, and it's so famous that pretty much everybody of a certain age and everybody who's into the paranormal has heard of the Enfield poltergeist. Furniture moved, voices were heard, and voices were heard through Janet, like I mentioned. So it was on Green Street in North London. Hodgson family was the centre of this activity, and it all began with strange noises, quickly escalated into something far more terrifying. So, August 1977, year I was born, the Hodgson children reported hearing knocking sounds, and soon furniture in their bedroom began moving by itself. Chairs tipped over, drawers opened, and the activity seemed to focus on Janet. As it escalated, the disturbances grew more and more violent. Objects flew across the room, toys were thrown at one point, large chests of drawers slid across the room as if being pushed by an invisible force. Eyewitnesses, including neighbours and local police officers, also witnessed the events. One of the most eerie parts for me of the Enfield case was this deep, gravelly voice that spoke through Janet. Investigators recorded this voice, Maurice Grosse did, during interviews which claimed to be Bill Wilkins, a man who died in the house before. And they were saying that Janet could talk for hours in this voice, and it was like coming from the back of her throat. And if you've ever tried to do a gravelly voice, after a few minutes your voice gets sore, but she never got a sore throat. And they were saying it was coming from a part of her throat that wouldn't normally be used when you were talking. It's very strange. And that's the clip I played earlier. Very creepy, haunting voice. So, Maurice Grosse and Guy Lyon Playfair Members of the Society for Psychical Research, or the SPR, investigated the case. They spent months recording events and conducting interviews with the family. Morris pretty much moved in at one point, and he was a very respectable guy. So Morris Gross, if you've ever been driving around and you've got the rotating advert billboards, the rotating ones, Morris Gross invented those, weirdly. Gross and Playfair captured audio of the strange voice and even photographs of Janet allegedly levitating above a bed. Now, I've seen these photos. They're available here, and it does look like Janet's jumping. Some have claimed that Janet and her siblings may have faked parts of the haunting. So much so that at one point Janet did actually admit to fabricating a few events, though she insisted that most of the disturbances were real. And that, I think, is pivotal for me, that they said, yes, we did do, and they were caught out a couple of times on tape. But at what point do you stop believing them? So during 1979, so a couple of years later, the activity slowly dissipated, but the Hodgson family never fully recovered from the trauma. Janet later said that haunting never really ended, but just quietened down over time. Janet is a very private person, and she does come out for interviews every now and again, but I can't imagine what she will have been through. The Enfield Poltergeist remains one of the most famous and controversial cases in paranormal history. While skeptics continue to question the legitimacy of the events, the sheer volume of witnesses, recordings and evidence make it, for me, one of the most fascinating cases. I can't see how, with all of the evidence and the fact that multiple people were there a lot of the time, how you can not say that something definitely happened. Anyway, moving on to the Bell Witch. So this is going back a bit, 1817. Imagine being tormented by an invisible entity so powerful that it leads to untimely death. This is what we're talking about. We love this. The Bell Witch haunting took place in Adams, Tennessee, over a period between 1817 and 1821. John Bell, the patriarch of the Bell family, was the primary target of the disturbances, which ranged from strange noises to physical assaults. It's one of the earliest and best documented cases of poltergeist-like activity in the US. And interestingly, it's gone for the head of the family, the male head of the family, the dad, the patriarch, John. So it all began in 1817 when John Bell and his family started hearing strange noises around their farmhouse. Notice a theme already. Scratching, knocking and chains dragging across the floor would disturb their nights. Soon the entity began physically attacking members of the family, particularly John and his daughter Betsy Bell. Betsy would often feel her hair being pulled or be slapped by an invisible force. Witnesses reported hearing loud, disembodied voices taunting the family. Spirit began communicating through spoken word, identifying itself as Kate, the spirit of a woman who claimed to have been wronged by John Bell in some way. The story gained so much attention that General Andrew Jackson, who would be future US president, visited the Bell farm with his men. They were reportedly spooked by the witch and left after one night. And he then said, "I would rather face the entire British Army than to spend another night with the Bell Witch." Word of the haunting spread, drawing visitors from across the country who came to witness the phenomena. Many claimed to have first experienced strange occurrences and all the other types of events that happened as well. The haunting climaxed in 1820 when John Bell mysteriously fell ill. He began suffering from seizures and eventually died. The Bell Witch reportedly took credit for his death, saying, "I fixed his medicine." John Bell's death certificate is one that reads, "Murdered by a spirit. And it's one of the only death certificates where a ghost is mentioned as the cause of death. The Bell Witch haunting left a lasting legacy, with some believing that the spirit is still active in the area. The haunting inspired books, documentaries and movies, including American Haunting. To this day, people still report strange happenings near the Bell's family Olds farm. So the Rosenheim poltergeist case occurred in a small law office in the town of Rosenheim in Germany in 1967. What began as unexplained electrical disturbances quickly escalated into full-blown chaos. So the strange occurrences started with the office's phones, which would ring randomly, even when disconnected. Investigators later discovered that the phones registered hundreds of calls in a short span, but many of these calls hadn't been made by any of the office staff. Soon the lights in the office began to flicker uncontrollably. Electricians were called in, but they couldn't find any fault in the wiring. Electrical equipment also malfunctioned, and circuit breakers tripped for no apparent reason. Employees and witnesses reported seeing objects like files and furniture move by themselves. One account describes a heavy filing cabinet moving several feet across the floor with no visible force pushing it. Dr. Hans Bender, a respected German parapsychologist, was called to investigate. His team of scientists placed monitoring equipment throughout the office and captured unusual spikes in EMFs during the disturbances. They also witnessed objects moving without apparent cause. The phenomena seemed to centre around one employee, 19-year-old secretary Anne-Marie Schneider. When she was present, the disturbances were more frequent. Some theorised that her presence, and potentially her emotional state, was causing the poltergeist activity, in line with the theory of recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. The activity continued for several weeks before finally tapering off. However, the case drew significant media attention, and the Rosenheim poltergeist became one of the most well-known and controversial paranormal events in Europe. Critics claimed the disturbances were caused by faulty wiring or deliberate hoaxes by the employees. However, the volume of witnesses, including law enforcement officers and technicians, make it difficult to dismiss the case entirely. The case remains a fascinating and puzzling one. Whether caused by electrical faults or a hoax, some unknown paranormal force has left a lasting mark on the field of paranormal research. So the idea that the human mind may play a role in the manifestation of poltergeist activity is a theory that fascinates me and both paranormal researchers and psychologists alike for decades. It hinges on the concept of psychokinesis, particularly RSPK, as I mentioned, recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, which suggests that individuals, often unconsciously, can exert physical force on their surroundings through sheer mental energy. The psychokinesis theory argues that poltergeist phenomena are not caused by external spirits or entities, but rather by an individual's mind projecting internal emotional turmoil outward. Now, I get that. The idea that during moments of extreme stress or distress, the brain can unconsciously release energy that affects the physical environment, leading to objects moving, lights flickering, etc. Like somebody just with this massive internal rage of emotions, just in it outwards, if that's a way of saying it. So in many documented cases of poltergeist activity, there seems to be a common thread: the presence of an individual, often young pubescent female, who's at the centre of the disturbances. The person, referred to as the agent, is believed to be the source of the psychokinetic energy. Adolescence, particularly in females, is a time of intense emotional and psychological change. Hormonal fluctuations during puberty can lead to heightened emotional states, stress, anger, frustration or fear that may serve as a kind of fuel for these manifestations. William Roll, one of the foremost researchers on RSPK, believed that this emotional turmoil could be the catalyst for poltergeist phenomena. The energy that accompanies these emotions might be expressed externally through psychokinesis rather than being processed internally. Adolescents, particularly girls, often face significant social pressure and emotional conflict during puberty. This can range from family dynamics to school stress, bullying, or identity struggles. These psychological stressors could serve as a trigger, causing a subconscious desire to act out or release pent-up frustration in ways that defy typical behaviour. In some ways, poltergeist activity could be viewed as an extreme form of emotional expression, a way for the individual to scream, like I said, or make their emotional turmoil known without consciously understanding it. The disturbances may reflect repressed feelings or conflicts that are too overwhelming to express verbally. Now, you need to watch Carrie or a film like that, whereby this girl goes through a lot of stress and her manifestation of anger leads to intense paranormal and supernatural events happening, like people dying and injuries and blood and fire. And whilst that's extreme, that gives a media of how it all manifests it in a way that you can understand. Some paranormal researchers believe that young girls, particularly those undergoing puberty, are more sensitive to paranormal forces or energies, making them more likely to experience or even attract poltergeist activity. The heightened sensitivity during adolescence might make them more receptive to unknown forces, amplifying the activity. In these cases, the agent might not be causing the phenomena, but could be acting as a conduit or focal point for external paranormal energy to manifest more intensely. This theory walks the line between psychological explanations and supernatural influences. From a purely psychological perspective, though, some suggest that prepubescent girls may be more prone to experience poltergeist phenomena due to their brain's developmental state. Puberty is a period of rapid cognitive and emotional growth, and some psychologists speculate that the brain may misinterpret or create paranormal phenomena as a way to process overwhelming changes. This theory posits that poltergeists may be hallucinations or mental projections, but they feel very real to the individuals involved. The Jungian interpretation could suggest that poltergeist activity is a manifestation of the unconscious mind trying to resolve inner conflicts. The chaos of the poltergeist could symbolize internal struggles or repressed desires, projecting them into a physical world in the manner the conscious mind can perceive. One popular hypothesis is that poltergeist activity as a kind of pressure valve for intense pent-up emotions. Instead of internalizing all the stress and tension that comes with adolescence, some individuals may unconsciously release this energy outward in the form of disturbances. The moving objects, strange noises and other phenomena might serve as an unconscious cry for help or attention. In this way, the poltergeist could be seen as a symbolic representation of the individual's emotional state. It's chaotic, unpredictable and out of control, much like the emotions of a pubescent individual and what they might be experiencing. In cases like the Enfield poltergeist, the disturbances began around the time of a family crisis, adding weight to the idea that poltergeists might represent a form of emotional outburst or release. Another aspect of the psychokinesis theory is the idea that the mind, particularly in emotionally charged individuals, can unconsciously manipulate physical matter. The mind's ability to influence the external world is still considered fringe science, but some researchers suggest that in emotional states, certain people can exert control over their environment without realizing it. Adolescence, with its intense hormonal changes and emotional instability, may amplify this ability, causing individuals to inadvertently create poltergeist-like activity. The theory suggests that when a young person experiences deep internal conflict, the mind may respond by projecting this conflict onto the physical world, creating the disturbances commonly associated with poltergeist cases. Critics argue, though, that attributing poltergeist activity to psychokinesis lacks scientific backing, given that no concrete evidence supports the existence of this phenomenon in controlled environments. Skeptics often explain poltergeist activity as a result of trickery, psychological delusion, or environmental factors like faulty wiring, wind drafts, or other mundane causes. Some psychologists also argue that adolescents in these cases might be acting out, fabricating the disturbances as a way to cope with emotional challenges. They suggest that many of these young girls may be using a poltergeist as a way to gain attention or express feelings of powerlessness in their lives. Janet Hodgson in the Enfield poltergeist, the theory was that she got so connected to Maurice Grosse, who, as I mentioned, came to essentially live with the family for months at a time, that she didn't want him to go. She saw a new father figure in her life and she wanted to hold on to it. So by creating these manifestations, however she did them, whether she faked them or she projected them, that she was able to keep this father figure there, this older guy who cared for the family, grew to care for the Hodgsons because of the extreme things they were going through. If you check on Apple TV, there's I think it's a 4-parter about the Enfield poltergeist. Oh my God, it's amazing. It's all the recordings and voice recordings, but sort of actors miming it. So everything you hear actually happened. It's phenomenal. So whether poltergeist activity is caused by external forces, subconscious psychokinetic energy, or psychological stress, the pattern of pubescent females being at the centre of many of these disturbing cases is hard to ignore. Theories abound, from paranormal explanations to purely psychological ones, but the enduring question is whether the mind is powerful enough to manipulate the physical world, or whether poltergeists are simply a reflection of the chaos within. This idea of the mind creating a phenomena, particularly the emotionally charged pubescent individuals, taps into a broader conversation about the relationship between the human psyche and the unexplained. Personally, I feel that the pubescent girl or the child or the adolescent or the person at the centre of the activity is a conduit for a psychological and then physical manifestation of something. But the fact that it ramps up in an orderly fashion, which is weird considering the chaotic nature of the phenomena, that's starting on the rapping, then moving objects, physical appearances and disappearances of objects, physical harm, attacks, voices, sounds. It ramps up and then just drops off. It's very strange that it creates this environment of fear and almost feeds on that fear until it's at such a point that it's emotionally drained the family that it almost extinguishes itself and then moves on to the next family. So I don't know whether it's an individual entity that goes around doing all this, or the emotional stress or whatever that ignites essentially a touch paper for this firework that explodes onto the family scene and creates such an intense and rational fear of the unknown, because, like I mentioned right at the start, you can see a solid object and be scared of it, but to not be able to see this object or this entity and it consume your life so much that fear is what drives an increase in the manifestations, I don't know what it is, and I think it could be that initial manifestation of the distress and distress of the person, but then it becomes a fear-feeding entity of its own. I'd be interested in everybody's thoughts, but I love poltergeist cases. I love the fact that it's so unknown, yet so investigated and documented. And I think it hits me right in the root of my child primal fear of this unknown entity attacking you, and you can't see it, you can't feel it, apart from cold spots. You can't protect yourself from something you cannot see or establish where it's come from, what it's going to do, except that you know it's probably going to get worse before it gets any better. And psychologically, that must create some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder that you will live with you for the rest of your life. And how you get through that, I don't know. But anyway, thanks for listening.